Have you ever wondered how long you'd survive on a medieval battlefield? Would you even make it through the morning roll call? How does one brush their teeth without toothpaste? Or, let's be honest, teeth. What's for breakfast when the cook is an archer with no culinary experience, and the closest thing to a vegetable is a dirt-covered turnip? Did soldiers really wear armor all day, or did they just use it to store snacks? And how do you even go to the bathroom when your chainmail has no zipper? Would you survive long enough to regret all your life choices? Or would you become part of the world's most unpleasant group photo, the fallen? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1415, in the middle of the 100 Years' War. Your head hurts, you're covered in something that's probably mud, let's hope, and someone's yelling for you to find your helmet, if you can remember which end it goes on. Let's see how long you last. The sun isn't up, but you are. In fact, you're being kicked awake by someone whose name you never learned, and whose hygiene standards are best described as theoretical. Your bedding? A damp, lumpy sack of straw on cold ground. Your first thought? Maybe if you lie still, you'll get trampled and sent home early, but no such luck. The reality of medieval soldier life means there's no such thing as a snooze button unless you count a muddy boot to the ribs as gentle encouragement. Your first conscious sensation is the smell. It's a sort of communal funk, a special blend of old sweat, damp wool, unwashed feet, and, somewhere in the mix, last night's attempt at fish stew. The air is cold and heavy, and your breath fogs out in front of you, which is ironic, because you'll soon be sweating like a boiled turnip inside your armor. You open your eyes to a world that's all shades of brown and grey. There's a line of boots in your face, some made of leather, others made of hope and leftover scraps. Above you, the flapping canvas of the campaign tent is threatening to let in the drizzle, and beside you, your closest friends and worst enemies. Other men snoring, muttering, and scratching places that should never be scratched in public. Someone's singing, or maybe crying. It's still dark, so who can say? You try to stretch, but instantly regret it. Your muscles ache from yesterday's march, and your back feels like it spent the night wrestling a bag of rocks, which, in a way, it did. As you sit up, straw clings to your hair and face, and you pull a small beetle out of your collar. Breakfast, if you're desperate. Your neighbor grunts a greeting that might just be a warning. The camaraderie is palpable, like mold on old bread. You're all in this together, but not happily. The sergeant stomps through the tent, bellowing at everyone to rise and shine. There's nothing like the sound of a career yeller first thing in the morning, especially when his breath could stop a charging horse. He reminds you that any soldier who isn't up in 10 seconds will be volunteered for latrine duty, which is, in medieval terms, a fate worse than death. You leap up so fast you nearly pull something important. Now comes the ritual of finding your gear. In the dim light, you rummage through a pile of belongings that all look identical, because medieval fashion is 99% earth tones and 1% suspicious stains. Your boots are damp. Your socks, if you're lucky enough to have them, are crusty. Your tunic smells like every mistake you've ever made. Somewhere, your helmet is being used as a makeshift chamber pot by someone who lost a bet. The first real challenge of the day is putting on your clothes without stepping in anything living, steaming, or moving. Lice and fleas are an accepted part of the uniform. If you complain, you get assigned to pick them out of the sergeant's beard, a task rumored to be fatal. You make do, layering wool over linen and topping it off with the fashion-forward look of whatever isn't soaked. Outside, it's still barely dawn. The camp is a landscape of sagging tents, muddied footpaths, and the distant, mournful moo of a cow that's smarter than half your regiment. A cold wind slices through your clothes, and you start to miss your childhood bed. Lumpy though it was, At least it didn't move around at night. You join the shuffling line at the water barrel, where you attempt to splash some icy water on your face. It does little to help, but at least it shocks you awake. Someone behind you mumbles about his toe turning black. You nod in sympathy. Even though you're just happy, you still have toes. All around, soldiers are cursing, joking, and inventing new ways to tie their belts, as if it'll somehow make the day less dangerous. You check your kit, eye your fellow survivors, and wonder if today will be the day you finally get promoted, or simply remembered as that guy who always tripped over the firewood. Welcome to dawn in a medieval army. Cold, itchy, grumpy, and guaranteed to make you question every life decision that brought you here. And the worst part? This is the easiest part of your day. Congratulations, you've survived the night. Now it's time for breakfast. A bowl of congealed porridge with the nutritional value of a doorstop, and possibly a side of dried peas that double as projectile weapons when morale gets low. You eat fast, because someone else's fleas are already trying to relocate. Breakfast in a medieval army camp is not a meal. It's a daily battle in its own right. Forget everything you've ever known about breakfast being the most important meal of the day. In the 14th century, it's more like the most forgettable meal of your life, with an aftertaste that haunts you until the next ration arrives. Usually cold, late, and with bonus texture. The camp cook, a man who last washed his hands during the reign of a different king, stands behind a bubbling cauldron. He's armed with a wooden ladle, a 1,000-yard stare, and a deep suspicion of anything resembling seasoning. You shuffle forward in line, bowl in hand, trying not to make eye contact. He slops a ladle of greyish porridge into your bowl, and it lands with the sound of a wet sock hitting a stone wall. If you're lucky, there's a glob of lard melting on top for flavour. You look down. It's a mystery mash, some oats, a hint of barley, and the vague suggestion of vegetables, maybe a carrot if someone was feeling generous. Sometimes there are beans, sometimes there are weevils, and sometimes there's a tiny rock for extra crunch. Everyone pretends not to notice. Chewing is mostly optional, because the stuff slides down on its own, leaving a trail of sadness all the way to your stomach. There are no forks, and spoons are for the upper crust, so you make do with a piece of bread as your eating utensil. Well, bread is generous. What you're holding is a fist-sized lump of stale dough, so hard you could use it to patch a wall or bludgeon a rat. You dip it in the porridge, partly to soften the bread, and partly in the hope it'll mask the flavour. Spoiler, it doesn't. Across the fire, your fellow soldiers are choking down their own rations. A few mutter quiet prayers, others attempt humour. Tastes better than my mother-in-law's cooking, one says, to no one's amusement. The older veterans just eat in silence, eyes glazed over, already reliving better meals from a decade ago, when they still had hope and at least one healthy tooth. Occasionally, breakfast comes with a treat. A dried pea or two tossed in as extra rations. Dried peas are infamous in the camp, not because anyone likes them, but because they are harder than optimism in November, and when flung with enough force, can leave a welt. There's an unspoken rule: don't complain about the food, or the peas will fly. The real threat, though, is what happens later. Medieval army food is notorious for what it does to your insides. If you're not doubled over by lunchtime, you're either unusually lucky or possibly made of iron. Porridge might be filling, but it's also slow to digest and fast to ferment. That's why camp latrines are always busy, and the phrase "taking cover" has a whole different meaning. Sometimes on feast days or after a rare windfall, you might get a sliver of salted meat. Don't get too excited. Meat could mean anything from old pork to something that once oinked, mooed, or hissed. And don't bother asking the cook what it is. His best answer is, don't ask. Drinks? Don't even think about fresh water. The safest thing to drink is small beer, a weak, watery ale, that at least kills most bacteria and won't get you drunk before battle. It's the breakfast beverage of champions and children alike. You finish your meal, scraping the bowl for every last glob. Hunger is a relentless companion, and you never know when the next meal is coming. As you hand your bowl back, you wonder if you're braver for facing battle or for eating what's served. So you stand, pat your stomach, and accept your fate. Breakfast has ended. The real fighting is about to begin, and your main weapon is the hope that nothing you just ate comes back to haunt you before lunch. You're handed armor that fits about as well as a toddler's Halloween costume on a grown man. It's heavy, it smells, and there's definitely something alive in the padding. By the time you strap on your helmet, you've sweat out 2 pounds and most of your dignity. The ritual of getting dressed for medieval battle is less about heroism and more about negotiating with a series of increasingly uncooperative objects. First comes the linen undershirt, if you're lucky, and if you're not, it's straight to scratchy wool. You pull it over your head and instantly regret your choices, because every fiber seems to have been designed specifically to irritate human skin. Over this, you layer a thick padded gambeson. Imagine a quilted jacket, stuffed with straw, hair, and the ghost of everyone who's ever complained about chafing. It's meant to protect you from bruises and blisters, but mostly it makes you look and feel like a lumpy mattress with arms. Next comes the chainmail, which someone swears is one size fits all. Spoiler, it doesn't. It's cold, clammy, and weighs more than your average family dog. As you pull it over your head, it catches on your hair and pinches your neck. Every link feels like a tiny, icy handshake from the Reaper himself. Once it's on, you move with the grace of a sack of onions rolling downhill. The mail drags at your shoulders and hips, threatening to rearrange your spine. The only thing keeping it up is a fraying belt you pray will hold until sunset. Then come the leggings, either wool or, if you've truly angered the gods, more chainmail. You wriggle into them, sweating and swearing, because nothing says combat ready like getting stuck halfway and needing 2 friends to tug you free. Medieval leggings offer no support and less privacy. Modesty isn't a concern, survival is. And nothing puts your mind on mortality like the breeze sneaking up your tunic. Armor pieces are distributed by a man with the personality of a boiled turnip. You get what you get. Maybe you score a battered breastplate with dents from the last 3 owners. Maybe it's just hardened leather that smells like wet goat and despair. You strap it on, cinching belts as tight as they'll go. Your arms and legs receive mismatched plates, some rustier than others, some still sticky from yesterday's cleaning. Elbow and knee guards might actually offer protection, or they might pinch so badly you consider removing your limbs entirely. Now for the gloves, known as gauntlets, fashioned from leather, metal, and the medieval world's last ounce of optimism. They are stiff, unforgiving, and only theoretically fit human hands. The only thing harder than putting them on is doing anything while wearing them. Want to hold a sword? Good luck. Want to tie your own shoelaces? Forget it. You'd have better luck juggling eels in a barrel. The final touch is the helmet, a heavy, domed masterpiece that smells like 1,000 years of shared anxiety. The padding inside is soggy from yesterday's sweat and today's rain, but you squeeze it onto your head. Your ears are instantly muffled, your vision narrows, and you realize you can now only see in the directions least likely to be useful. Breathing feels like inhaling through a damp sock. Some designs have a nasal guard that pokes you right in the eye if you look sideways. If your helmet has a visor, congratulations, you've just acquired a medieval sauna for your face. Once fully suited, you try to stand up. Gravity is less a law and more a personal grudge at this point. Moving requires advanced planning and a gentle rocking motion, like a cow trying to rise from a mud puddle. You clank, creak, and rattle so much that subtlety becomes impossible. If stealth was ever an option, it's now a distant memory. But you're ready, or at least as ready as anyone could be for a day of swinging swords, dodging arrows, and praying your armor lasts longer than your optimism. In the end, medieval military fashion isn't about looking good. It's about not dying fast. And sometimes, that's the only style that matters. Ever tried to relieve yourself while wearing 50 pounds of metal? Welcome to a squatting contest with your own bladder. The latrine is a pit with a plank, surrounded by men who pretend not to watch, but definitely judge your technique. In the glamorous world of medieval soldiery, there's one inescapable truth. What goes in must eventually come out. And that's when things get complicated. For a start, nobody built these camps with privacy in mind. The closest thing you'll find to a bathroom is a hole in the ground, maybe with a rough plank to balance on, maybe just a particularly muddy patch behind some tents. If you're lucky, someone has thrown up a makeshift canvas curtain. If you're not, your only audience is the curious camp dog and whatever passed for hygiene standards in the 15th century. Let's talk logistics. Medieval armor is not designed with bathroom breaks in mind. The first hurdle is simply getting out of your layers. You fumble with buckles, untie leather straps, and wriggle out of your gambeson. Meanwhile, the pressure in your bladder grows more urgent by the second. The chainmail, once again, does you no favors. It hangs, heavy and uncooperative, right where you need the most access. There is no quick release. There's just determination, cold air, and a prayer that nothing gets caught in the process. If you're a new recruit, your first trip to the latrine is a kind of rite of passage, a humiliating, public reminder that in medieval life, dignity is the first casualty. The old hands know all the tricks. They've learned which bush hides the best, where the wind won't turn your business into a social event, and how to drop trousers fast enough to beat the rush. The veterans have also developed a sixth sense for when the latrine is least crowded, which usually means right after dawn or in the rain. The latrine itself? It's a pit, dug by the least fortunate soldiers on the first day of camp. There's a plank across it, worn smooth by thousands of nervous backsides. The smell could drop a grown man at 10 paces. It's a complex aroma of rotting food, ammonia, and a hint of despair. Think farmyard meets roadside diner restroom after a summer festival. There are no amenities. Toilet paper is a future dream. If you're lucky, there might be a bundle of leaves, a ragged scrap of linen, or a handful of moss. If you're unlucky, it's your hand. Either way, you're going to be washing up in a cold stream later, assuming you survive the trip without losing your balance and plunging in head first. And then there's the social angle. Men gather nearby, pretending not to listen, telling stories or making jokes at the expense of anyone who fumbles or takes too long. It's the medieval equivalent of the high school locker room, only muddier and somehow more traumatic. You try not to think about the fact that the officer who yelled at you yesterday is now sitting 3 feet away, grunting in rhythm to the chorus of flatulent misery. Every embarrassing noise is amplified by the quiet morning air. Sometimes, during a siege or long march, there's not even a pit. You're forced to make do behind a bush, a wagon, or, if you're truly unlucky, just your own shadow. The real risk isn't embarrassment, but speed. Taking too long could mean missing breakfast, getting left behind, or worst of all, being caught mid-squat by a patrol or the enemy's arrow volley. More than one poor soul has met their end with their trousers around their ankles, which isn't exactly the heroic saga you want sung about in the tavern. As you finish your business, you stand, adjust what little remains of your dignity, and make your way back to camp. You know you'll be back soon, thanks to the breakfast you just ate. But for now, you chalk up another hard-won victory. Surviving medieval soldier life means mastering the bathroom break. Awkward, humiliating, but absolutely essential. And remember, if you can handle this, you can handle anything the day throws at you, probably. You'd like to freshen up before battle, but the best you can do is rinse your mouth with watered-down ale and hope whatever's living in there is on your side. Toothaches are so common, you start to wonder if they're just a normal part of military service. In the medieval army, oral hygiene is a concept as distant as a hot shower or a functioning HR department. You wake up with your teeth feeling like they've been sanded with gravel and then coated in old cheese. There's no toothbrush waiting on your battered wooden crate, and definitely no toothpaste. In fact, the only toothpaste most soldiers know is a vague memory of their grandmother chewing a mint leaf once, long ago, before the last crusade. If you ask around, the advice for freshening your breath is simple: drink more ale. Ale, it turns out, is the medieval multi-tool. It hydrates you, feeds you, numbs the pain, and, allegedly, makes your mouth less deadly to small animals. Unfortunately, it doesn't do much for the film of misery clinging to your teeth after days of stale bread, tough meat, and yesterday's bean surprise. The only thing sharper than your hunger is the crust of food stuck between your molars. You consider rinsing your mouth out with water, but everyone knows what's in the water, all the things that shouldn't be. Besides, using precious water for your mouth is a luxury reserved for nobles, lunatics, and the hopelessly optimistic. Most men just gnaw on a twig, snap it into a makeshift brush, and scrape off whatever they can. If you're lucky, you find a bit of sage or mint and pretend you've discovered modern dentistry. Spoiler, you haven't. Let's talk about dental pain. You've heard of the knight's curse, that persistent throb that starts in your jaw and radiates to your soul. The army is filled with grown men whimpering like children every time a cold wind hits a cavity. Toothaches are so widespread that the medic, also known as the barber surgeon, has developed a special look, equal parts sympathy and dread, every time someone approaches holding their jaw. And what does medieval dentistry offer? Well, if you're lucky, a bit of honey to numb the pain. If you're not, it's the pliers. And by pliers, we mean an iron tool that's also used to fix armor, pull out arrows, and sometimes adjust the wheels on a wagon. There's no anesthesia, no gentle bedside manner. Just two strong friends to hold you down, and a third to make the sign of the cross. Extraction is quick, brutal, and always followed by a round of applause from those still waiting for their turn. The good news? The pain in your mouth is instantly replaced by pain somewhere else. So at least you're not bored. Don't bother complaining to your sergeant. If you ask for a day off due to a toothache, you'll get laughed at, assigned to shovel latrines, or told a long story about how real men don't mind a little oral rot. The truth? Everyone minds. It's just that in a world where wounds, plague, and starvation lurk around every corner, dental misery barely cracks the top 10. It doesn't help that most army food is designed to break teeth, not preserve them. The bread is so hard you could use it as a weapon. Meat comes salted, dried, or both, basically medieval beef jerky with a side of regret. And don't even ask about nuts. The last time someone tried to crack a walnut with their molars, he ended up on soup duty for a month, -2 teeth, and most of his pride. So you swallow your aches with your morning ration and try not to think about how many teeth you started this campaign with versus how many you'll finish with. In the end, your smile becomes a badge of honor, gapped, grimy, and missing a few pieces, but absolutely authentic. After all, nothing says seasoned veteran like a mouthful of medieval memories and the ability to whistle through the gaps. Orders come down to move out, which means hours of tramping through mud, rocks, and whatever's leaking from your neighbor's pack. Every step is a negotiation between your will to live and the developing colony of blisters on your feet. You think marching will be simple. How hard could it be? Just put one foot in front of the other, right? Wrong. Marching as a medieval soldier is less about glorious adventure and more about grinding tedium and low-level pain, stretched across endless, undulating countryside. You don't so much march as trudge, your feet sinking in mud with every step, while your armor pinches and your pack cuts new grooves into your shoulders. The day starts with someone yelling, usually the sergeant, who treats punctuality as a moral virtue. "Fall in," he roars, as if volume alone can cure blisters. You scramble to assemble your kit, which feels heavier than you remember. Probably because it's now absorbing water like a sponge. The air is thick with the mingled scents of damp earth, sweat, and hope that's just beginning to curdle. The first mile is manageable. You chat quietly with your neighbors, swapping stories, or at least making vague noises that sound like camaraderie. The sun's not too high, and you haven't yet stepped in anything warm and mysterious. But soon, conversation dries up, replaced by the rhythmic squelch of boots in mud and the increasingly creative curses as someone discovers a hidden pothole or steps in something left behind by the baggage train. By mile 2, your feet are already rebelling. The boots, generously described as leather, have the flexibility of a brick and the comfort of an old cheese grater. Each step produces new blisters, old blisters, and blisters you'll only discover later when you peel off your socks and meet your new roommates, pus and regret. If you're lucky, you find a stick to lean on. If not, you develop a limp that, in medieval fashion, is considered character building. You soon learn that the biggest enemy isn't always the soldiers across the field. Sometimes, it's the guy in front of you who walks too slow, or the one behind who keeps poking you with his spear by accident. Occasionally, the line slows to a crawl so the baggage wagons can catch up, and the whole army unleashes a collective groan that echoes for miles. You start to envy the archers, who somehow always manage to snag a ride on a passing cart or sneak off for a scouting mission in the shade. Breaks are rare and usually involve sitting in wet grass while the officers argue about directions. You pull off your boots and stare at your feet, now a mosaic of red, raw, and slightly green patches. Someone offers you a sip of ale. Someone else offers you a complaint about the commander's questionable sense of direction. Both are equally helpful. As the miles tick by, the scenery offers little comfort. It's an endless blur of hedges, muddy ruts, and distant hills that never seem to get closer. If you pass through a village, the locals peer out suspiciously. Sometimes they boo or throw turnips. Turnips being the universal medieval symbol for "get off my lawn." More often they simply stare, no doubt marveling at the parade of mud, noise, and increasingly questionable footwear. Finally, as dusk approaches, the march grinds to a halt. You're ordered to make camp on ground that's either too rocky, too wet, or suspiciously close to a field full of curious cows. You collapse, legs trembling, feet throbbing, sweat chilling on your back. The sergeant says, "Well done, men," as if you've accomplished something noble. You know better. Today's triumph was simply not sitting down and refusing to move. That, in medieval times, is what passes for victory. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. You're thirsty, but the only water available looks like it's been filtered through the laundry of an entire village. You drink it anyway, because dehydration will kill you faster than the bacteria, usually. The medieval soldier's relationship with water is, at best, complicated. On the one hand, you need it to survive. On the other, every time you fill your battered tin cup, you're basically spinning the wheel of misfortune. The nearest stream might sparkle in the morning sun, but up the bank you'll find a trio of oxen cooling their hooves, a group of archers rinsing questionable wounds, and someone's child using the water for target practice. This is not what modern folks would call spring-fed mountain purity. This is a medieval soup, unfiltered, and not even remotely gluten-free. The camp tries to boil water when it can, but boiled often just means lukewarm and now flavored with ashes from the fire. The result? A beverage that's as likely to hydrate you as to send you sprinting for the nearest latrine, which, as we've discussed, is a lottery no one wants to win. You've heard tales of men braver than you falling to their knees after a single swallow, groaning about curses, bad omens, or last night's pottage. You learn to drink with caution, nose pinched, eyes squeezed shut, and hope whispered like a prayer. Because of this, the real drink of choice is small beer, an extremely weak ale, barely alcoholic, but at least boiled during brewing. This means it's safer, tastes like something, and, best of all, makes you forget about the taste of anything else for a while. Everyone drinks it, soldiers, officers, even children. If you catch someone pouring plain water down their throat, you start planning their funeral, or at least putting in a good word with the camp priest. You've probably never considered yourself a connoisseur of weak beer. But by day 3 in camp, you can distinguish between slightly sour, with notes of turnip, and flat, with hints of mystery grain. In a way, it's a bonding experience. Men gather around the keg, sharing stories, swapping lice, and daring each other to try the water anyway. There's always one guy who boasts he can drink anything. There's also always one guy who spends the next day groaning behind a bush, blaming witchcraft for what is, in reality, just plain old medieval bacteria. Bathing? Don't make everyone laugh. Washing yourself is considered suspiciously luxurious. Any water that isn't drunk or used to stew questionable meat is a commodity too precious to be poured over human skin. Occasionally, someone claims to have washed their feet in a river upstream, and the rest of camp stares at them like they've grown a second head. The general belief is that water is for drinking and dying, not for cleanliness. You wonder, sometimes, how long you'll last before the water does you in. The wise ones say, let the beer settle your stomach and your nerves. The reckless ones drink deep and hope for the best. If you're really desperate, you might try to catch rainwater in your helmet, but given the camp's hygiene, the helmet probably adds more microbes than it removes. Some officers, believing themselves clever, order the men to take water only from the wells. Unfortunately, the wells are few and heavily contested. There are rumors of men getting into fistfights over who gets to use the bucket first. Even then, a good medieval well is still a roll of the dice. Sometimes you get clear water, sometimes you get a tadpole, and sometimes you get the taste of rusty iron and regret. The truth is, the threat of dehydration and dysentery are just background noise to a medieval army. You march, you sweat, you drink, you hope. And as you lift your battered cup of dubious liquid to your cracked lips, you make the silent pact every medieval soldier makes. If this doesn't kill me, maybe the enemy won't either. So cheers, soldier, drink up, and may fortune and your intestines favor the bold. The quartermaster hands you a sword that's older than most trees. It's blunt, rusted, and possibly haunted. Your shield is mostly woodworm and wishful thinking, but hey, at least you have something to point at the enemy. Arming yourself in a medieval army isn't about getting the best gear. It's about getting whatever's left, whatever didn't break last week, or whatever the quartermaster dislikes the least. Weapons are handed out with all the ceremony of receiving a parking ticket. The quartermaster himself is a grizzled veteran with a missing tooth and a nose that looks like it's lost more fights than you'll ever see. He sizes you up, grunts, and slaps a sword into your hand that's so dull it could be used as a butter knife, if you had any butter. You give it a test swing. The blade wobbles in the hilt, the balance is non-existent, and there's an odd notch near the tip that suggests this weapon has already retired several former owners one way or another. She's a beauty, the quartermaster lies, scratching himself. Treat her well, you nod, because it's either this or nothing. You're not about to argue with a man who keeps axes under his cot and has named all his boils. Then comes the shield. Your one protection against a world filled with arrows, swords, and uncoordinated friends. Your shield is at best an afterthought. It's a wooden plank covered with cracked hide, some faded paint, and more than a few suspicious stains. If you tap it, dust puffs out like ancient memories. The strap on the back is adjustable, which in this case means it's attached with hope and the kind of knot sailors would reject on principle. If you're lucky, or unlucky, enough to get armor-piercing weapons, you might get a pike. Pikes are essentially very long spears designed to poke enemies before they can poke you. The downside is you now have to carry something twice your height, which instantly makes you a target for every sergeant who needs someone to volunteer for the front row. Archers get longbows or crossbows, neither of which are easy to use. The longbow takes years of training, which you don't have, so you make do with squinting and hoping. Crossbows are slower but require less skill, unless you count the skill of not accidentally shooting the man next to you. You check your belt for backup weapons. Maybe a dagger, blunt of course, or if you're truly unlucky, just a sharpened stick. Some men tie old horseshoes to ropes, reasoning that anything swinging fast enough will ruin someone's day. If you find a rock that fits nicely in your hand, congratulations. You're officially armed for close quarters negotiations. The other soldiers line up for inspection. It's less parade, more junk sale. Swords with missing tips, axes with splintered handles, morning stars that have seen better centuries. The sergeant walks past, glancing at each of you, occasionally rapping a blade or shaking a shield. If your weapon fails the wave it in the air and hope it doesn't snap test, you get sent to the back for repairs, which usually means someone hits it with a rock until it looks less embarrassing. There's an odd camaraderie here. You show off any strange marks on your weapons as if they're family heirlooms. See this dent? Got it at the Siege of Nowhere. Oh, this notch? That's from when I tried to open a wine barrel. Don't ask. It's a ritual of acceptance. Everyone's gear is terrible, but at least it's equally terrible. Before battle, you find yourself compulsively checking your weapon. Is the sword still attached to the hilt? Does the shield still have a front? Can you swing your pike without impaling a friend? Every inspection is an act of faith and futility. And yet, when you step into line, clutching your battered sword and bug-infested shield, you feel oddly ready. You may not have the finest weapons, but you have something more important, a sense of humor, a small chance, and the knowledge that no one else's equipment is any better. And in medieval war, that's about as good as it gets. You're herded into formation by a man called Sergeant who yells at everyone, spits when he talks, and might actually enjoy this job. Orders are barked, but nobody can hear them over the collective sighs of despair. If you thought medieval armies were run by noble knights and wise commanders gently guiding their troops, you're about to get a rude awakening, delivered at maximum volume. The medieval military command structure is, in theory, a pyramid of authority and discipline. In practice, it's a tower of noise, confusion, and the inescapable sense that no one actually knows what's happening. At the bottom, there's you, the ordinary soldier. Above you is your corporal, a man whose only real qualification for leadership is that he survived one more march than you did and once killed a rat with a shoe. The corporal's job is to relay orders from the sergeant, check your gear, and blame you for everything that goes wrong. He's part babysitter, part parole officer, and 100% fed up. Then comes the sergeant, one of the most recognizable figures in any camp. You always know where to find him. Just follow the shouting. The sergeant is a professional shouter, with lungs of iron and a vocabulary that could peel the paint off a church door. He's up before dawn, stalking through tents, yelling at everyone to get up, line up, stand up, don't mess up. He shouts you into formation, shouts you into breakfast, shouts you out of the latrine. He is, in many ways, the medieval world's answer to the alarm clock, minus the snooze button, and plus a boot to the backside. Above the sergeant is the lieutenant, a man you might glimpse once a week, usually at a distance, usually on horseback. The lieutenant is responsible for passing down the captain's orders, looking important and making notes on a wax tablet that may or may not actually contain words. His primary skill is pretending he's about to do something useful, then disappearing whenever trouble appears. The captain, meanwhile, is a figure of mystery and suspicion. He has a tent, a table, and sometimes a proper chair, luxuries the common soldier only dreams of. Captains are supposed to plan strategy and lead charges, but most of the time they're busy worrying about supplies, writing letters, or negotiating with other captains about who gets which patch of mud. You see him at roll call, where he reads out your name, incorrectly, and then returns to the serious business of avoiding eye contact with the men who'll actually be doing the fighting. At the top is the noble or knight in charge, often a lord, sometimes a prince. Occasionally someone who bought their way into command and knows even less than you do about actual soldiering. They deliver speeches about honor, courage, and doing your duty for king and country, usually from a safe distance, and always while wearing far cleaner clothes than anyone else in camp. Their most important task is to stay alive, so the battle can be called a success, even if everyone else goes home in a wheelbarrow. Orders travel down this rickety ladder in a cascade of shouting, hand-waving, and, occasionally, interpretive dance. By the time a command reaches you, it's changed shape 3 times and may have lost all connection to reality. Hold the line becomes, "Stand over there," which morphs into, "Why are you standing there? Move." No matter the day, no matter the battle, the shouting never stops. You're yelled at to line up, to march, to duck, to charge, to run away, only officially called a tactical withdrawal, and to be ready for whatever happens next. You never quite know who's yelling, or why, but you learn to keep your head down and nod at appropriate moments. In the medieval army, confusion is just another weapon, and yelling is how you keep from falling asleep. So when you hear that bellowing voice, remember, it's not personal, it's tradition, and nobody ever got in trouble for shouting too much, just for not shouting loud enough. The archers are lining up for morning practice, which means you want to stand very far behind them. Arrows are flying everywhere, some in the right direction, others in a less fortunate trajectory. You wonder if the first casualty will even be the enemy. Archery practice in a medieval army camp is less a military exercise and more a daily exercise in risk management. The sound of bowstrings twanging echoes across the field as men, some experienced, most not, line up with their longbows, crossbows, or whatever vaguely pointy projectile launcher they were issued this week. The air crackles with anticipation, and, if you're standing nearby, raw survival instinct. It's not that medieval archers are unskilled. Some are downright legendary. But most are just trying not to embarrass themselves in front of the sergeant. The longbow itself is taller than some of its owners, requiring arms like tree trunks and a willingness to ignore shoulder pain. Training takes years, and most soldiers have been holding a bow for just about as long as it takes to regret it. The rest rely on hope, muscle memory, and a small prayer whispered to Saint Sebastian, patron saint of not getting accidentally shot by your friends. Targets for practice are set up at what feels like an optimistic distance, usually stuffed sacks or boards with faded rings painted on them. In theory, everyone aims for the center. In reality, arrows thud into the dirt, the hay, a nearby tree, or, in the worst case, go sailing off in a direction that prompts a round of nervous laughter and immediate head counting. Every now and then, a particularly enthusiastic recruit will let an arrow loose before anyone is ready. This is why the #1 rule of archery practice is never stand in front of, or beside, or, frankly, anywhere within a 90-degree arc of the shooting line. The phrase friendly fire isn't just a joke here. It's a statistical inevitability. For the crossbowman, things aren't much safer. Crossbows take an eternity to reload. And nothing builds tension quite like watching a man struggle to cock his bow with a bent crank and then misfire straight into his own boot. The lucky ones merely lose a chunk of leather, The unlucky ones get to explain the injury to the camp surgeon, who considers crossbow toe a personal annoyance. The sergeant stalks behind the line, roaring encouragement and creative insults in equal measure. He tells everyone to aim true, pull harder, and try not to take out your own squire. He demonstrates flawless form, then walks away right before the arrow practice resumes at a much lower standard. Meanwhile, the non-archers, everyone else, take this time to scatter as far as possible, pretending to fetch water, check equipment, or inspect something very interesting far across the field. There's an unspoken understanding that proximity to the archery range is the leading cause of non-battle-related injuries in camp. Only the bravest or the most foolish stick around to watch, usually in hopes of seeing someone lose a bet and have to run across the range in their underpants. Despite the chaos, there are moments of brilliance. Every once in a while, an arrow finds its mark. The camp erupts in cheers, the archer struts for the rest of the day, and everyone else tries to remember how he did it. But for every bullseye, there are 10 more arrows buried in someone's stew pot, firewood pile, or unlucky chicken. Archery practice is more than just preparation. It's the medieval version of quality control. The better you get, the fewer times you have to replace your hat. As for battle readiness, well, it helps to know that at least some of the arrows will go in the right direction when it matters. So, if you hear the call for morning archery, do yourself a favor. Stay well back, keep your helmet on, and try not to laugh too loudly when someone splits their own arrow, because in the lottery of medieval life, you'd rather not win the arrow roulette. By midday, the camp is a symphony of body odor, damp wool, burning tallow, and the unique aroma of communal foot rot. You never get used to it. You just lose the will to complain. Let's set the scene. The sun is high, your armor is baking, and every soldier around you is radiating their own unique blend of eau de medieval misery. There's no escape. Wherever you go, by the cook fire, the water barrels, or the tent where someone's trying to repair socks with twine and prayer, the air is thick with scents that would make a skunk consider a career change. First, there's the sweat. Medieval soldiers sweat early, often, and in quantities that seem physically impossible. The combination of wool, leather, and sheer panic creates a damp greenhouse effect under your armor. By noon, your shirt is stuck to your back, your socks are a tragic soup, and you're pretty sure your armpits have achieved sentience and are plotting their own escape. Then there's the feet. Oh, the feet. After hours of marching through mud, manure, and questionable puddles, the average soldier's boots are less footwear and more portable swamp. Blisters pop, toes go numb, and the air in the tent becomes so dense you can almost taste it. Soldiers tell horror stories of trench foot and camp rot. But the real horror is when someone takes their boots off and everyone in a 5-yard radius suddenly remembers a pressing engagement elsewhere. Camp life adds its own bouquet. Fires burn day and night. Some for cooking, some just to keep the bugs at bay, and others for the sheer psychological comfort of burning something that isn't your own stuff. The fat used in tallow candles and lamps gives off a smoky, greasy odor, sticking to your clothes and lingering in your hair. The cook's cauldron contributes as well. Onions, old beans, a scrap of meat, all blended into a vapor that's more experiment than meal. Let's not forget the livestock. Most armies travel with a supporting cast of animals, oxen for pulling wagons, horses for the lucky, goats and chickens for food and general annoyance. Each adds its own signature note to the air, earthy, pungent, and impossible to ignore. When the wind changes, you get a fresh wave of barnyard, just in case your nose was starting to recover. And then there's humanity itself. Personal hygiene is more hope than habit. Bathing is rare, only attempted when it rains or someone loses a bet. Lice, fleas, and other companions ensure that everyone is scratching, and the shared blankets are basically biological experiments in progress. A quick splash from the water barrel does little more than rearrange the grime. Sanitation is best described as aspirational. The latrine pits, dug on day 1 and filled by day 3, perfume the air with notes of ammonia, rot, and deep existential regret. Some soldiers joke that the smell keeps the enemy away. Others say it's the smell that makes them consider switching sides. Yet, in a strange way, the stench becomes part of life. Your nose stops protesting and simply gives up, filing for early retirement. You swap jokes about who smells the worst, create contests for most offensive socks, and treat a passing breeze as a minor miracle. The worst smells get blamed on the guy who snores loudest, or on the new recruits who still think soap is an option. In the end, the aroma of medieval warfare is not for the faint of heart or the sensitive of nose. But after a while, the stink isn't a punishment, it's a strange badge of belonging. If you can survive this, you can survive anything. And besides, if everyone smells equally bad, maybe, just maybe, nobody does. So take a deep breath, or don't. Either way, you're living the full sensory experience of history, one whiff at a time. Someone's already sliced their hand open on a sword. So it's time for medieval medicine, dirt, spit, and a bandage that hasn't been washed since last Lent. The camp barber surgeon looks at you and asks, "Which limb do you least need?" Medieval medicine is the art of improvisation, guesswork, and a healthy disregard for germs. As soon as there's a scrape, a gash, or a suspiciously swelling toe, you're directed to the surgeon's tent, a place where hope goes to die and blood stains the floorboards in permanent tribute to yesterday's patients. The doctor is often a multitasker. He cuts hair, pulls teeth, lances boils, and, in a real emergency, might even try to read Latin. His only real qualification? He owns a rusty saw. The surgeon's tools are laid out like a sinister buffet. There's a knife, a needle the size of a tent peg, some twine, and a jar of something that might have once been wine. For antiseptic, he recommends prayer. You try not to look at the pile of rags on the corner, the last guy's bandages, now a community resource. Your injury, be it a sliced finger or an arrow in the leg, is met with the same reaction. This'll sting, and sting it does. If you're bleeding, the answer is simple. Pressure, prayer, and a rag tied so tight you might never feel your hand again. Wounds are rinsed with water, ale, or, if you're especially unlucky, a swig of whatever the surgeon was drinking. If the cut is deep, he might stitch it. No anesthesia. Just a grim smile and an invitation to bite down on something. Tooth marks on the surgeon's stick are a local legend. Broken bones? You get a splint made from whatever wood is handy and the strict instruction to stop moving. If the bone's poking out, he might try to shove it back in, with predictable results. Dislocated shoulder? Time for the two-man tug-of-war and another prayer. No one's entirely sure what setting a bone means, but everyone agrees it involves more yelling than you'd expect. And infection? Oh, infection is inevitable. There's no concept of sterilization, so wounds fester, swell, and turn exciting colors. The answer is usually more cutting, or, if things get truly dire, amputation. Amputation is the medieval equivalent of turning it off and on again, a last resort, requiring lots of strong men to hold you down and a surgeon who's seen too much. Survival is 50-50, but hey, you'll get a nickname out of it. Pain relief is a joke. Sometimes there's a bit of poppy syrup or herbal concoction, but mostly it's a swig of ale, a mouthful of leather, and stern instructions not to scream too loud. Soldiers swap horror stories. The guy who survived leeching, the one who passed out from cupping, and the poor soul who sneezed during bloodletting and ended up with an unexpected haircut. If you do recover, congratulations. You're now bandaged, bruised, and even more convinced that the true enemy isn't the French. It's your own immune system. The surgeon waves you away. already eyeing the next unfortunate soul, and you limp back to camp, grateful to be alive, if only temporarily. Medieval medicine is about survival, not comfort. There are no clean sheets, no quiet rooms, no kindly nurse. There's only the surgeon, his tools, and the hope that your next wound will be small enough to handle, and, preferably, someone else's problem. Welcome to First Blood, where the cure is almost as bad as the injury, and complaining is strictly for the living. Soldiers keep themselves entertained with fistfights, friendly wrestling, and throwing rocks at things they shouldn't. Your best bet? Don't make eye contact with anyone holding a stick. Soldiers keep themselves entertained with fistfights, friendly wrestling, and throwing rocks at things they shouldn't. Your best bet? Don't make eye contact with anyone holding a stick. In the medieval army, violence isn't just a job requirement, it's a recreational activity. The day is long, the work is exhausting, and the boredom is deadly. So it's only natural that soldiers turn to the easiest available pastime, beating on each other for fun. In a world where stress relief options are limited and nobody's heard of therapy, sometimes the only thing standing between you and a nervous breakdown is a well-timed headlock. Hazing is practically a rite of passage for new recruits. If you're unlucky enough to look clean, well-fed, or optimistic, you're a prime target. Veterans might welcome you by hiding your boots, spiking your porridge with extra pepper, or worse, something they found behind the latrine, or giving you the classic medieval swirly, dunking your head in a bucket of cold water while everyone laughs. If you protest, congratulations. You've just signed up for round 2. If you think it's all good-natured fun, think again. Fistfights break out over anything, a stolen blanket, a rude joke, or the last scrap of salted meat. Arguments escalate quickly, usually fueled by boredom, cheap ale, and the general irritability that comes from sleeping 6 inches away from someone else's feet. The fights themselves are rarely elegant, more flailing than form, more shouting than strategy. The official rules? There are none. If someone taps out, everyone stops, unless it's a Tuesday, in which case all bets are off. Wrestling is technically training, but nobody's fooling anyone. The sergeant claims it's to build strength and improve morale, but mostly it's an excuse to see who can toss who into the mud. Some men actually have moves, farm-bred grapplers who can take down a bull, and others just hold on for dear life, praying they don't get thrown into the cook fire or the nearest puddle of suspicious origin. Victory brings bragging rights and maybe a slightly less terrible place to sleep. Defeat brings mockery, and possibly a new nickname involving pigs. Projectile contests are a camp favorite. When rocks run out, someone produces a turnip or, in a display of true desperation, yesterday's bread. Targets range from empty helmets to sleeping soldiers, and the line between game and assault is very thin. The reward for a well-aimed throw? Laughter, applause, and the occasional threat of retribution. Miss, and you just volunteered yourself for next time. The officers mostly turn a blind eye, so long as nobody ends up in the surgeon's tent. In fact, some encourage the roughhousing, reasoning that men who fight each other are less likely to panic in a real battle. This is wishful thinking, but it's easier than coming up with another lecture on discipline. Sometimes, the sergeant himself joins in, usually to restore order by tossing the worst offenders into the nearest horse trough. Injuries happen. Black eyes, bruised ribs, the odd broken nose, but no one complains, at least not loudly. Grievances are settled with another round, or, for the especially creative, a prank involving boots and honey. The unwritten rule is simple. If you can walk away, you're fine. If you can't, you're still expected at roll call. By the time lunch arrives, most disputes are forgotten. Men who were at each other's throats an hour ago are now side by side, sharing terrible bread and stories that get wilder with every telling. In the medieval army, violence isn't personal. It's just another way to pass the time before the next round of actual fighting. And sometimes, it's the only thing keeping you sane. Rain turns the camp into a swamp, while sun bakes you in your own juices. Armor acts as a portable sauna in July and a refrigerator in December. Either way, you're marinating. Rain turns the camp into a swamp, while sun bakes you in your own juices. Armor acts as a portable sauna in July and a refrigerator in December. Either way, you're marinating. In the medieval army, you quickly discover that your greatest enemy is not the opposing force, but the weather. Whatever you imagined about heroic battles is quickly washed away, literally, by the first unexpected storm. Rain is the most reliable companion of the medieval soldier. It arrives with no warning, soaks your blanket, fills your boots, and turns the camp into a sticky mess where every step is a gamble between mud, manure, and losing your shoe entirely. Tents leak, fires sputter, and the smell of wet wool permeates everything. Even your bread gets soggy, taking on the flavor and texture of disappointment. Cold is a different beast. It creeps in overnight, stealing away any warmth you thought you had. Breath fogs in the morning air, fingers freeze to sword hilts, and noses drip in a sad tribute to your failing morale. The fire, once the center of camaraderie, becomes a battlefield of its own, as soldiers jostle for a spot close enough to avoid frostbite, but not so close as to singe their already threadbare socks. On the coldest nights, you lie awake shivering, teeth chattering, wondering if you'd rather face an enemy arrow or just be allowed to hibernate until spring. Then there's heat. Medieval summer is not the gentle, sunny haze you remember from paintings. The sun turns armor into a torture device. Metal plates become griddles. Wool tunics become sweat lodges. Sweat runs down your back, pooling in places best left unmentioned, and the urge to strip down and run for the nearest stream grows stronger with every passing hour. If you dare remove your helmet for relief, the glare off someone else's shield nearly blinds you, and the flies descend like a biblical plague. Dehydration sets in before noon, and you start daydreaming about snow, conveniently forgetting last winter's frostbitten toes. Wind is a wild card, unpredictable and rarely helpful. Sometimes it brings the welcome smell of a distant bakery. More often, it whips the campfire smoke directly into your eyes, or flings your only dry blanket into the nearest ditch. On really unlucky days, it combines with rain to deliver horizontal misery, soaking you from eyebrow to ankle no matter how tightly you huddle under your cloak. The only constant is discomfort. Weather in the medieval army isn't a backdrop, it's an active, hostile participant in every campaign. It shapes your mood, your meals, even the outcome of battles. Sieges stall for months because rivers flood or roads become impassable. Marches grind to a halt as wheels sink into mud. Weapons rust, bread molds, and spirits plummet with the barometer. Superstitions bloom wherever the weather does. Some blame the sergeant for cursing the sky with his foul language. Others swear by lucky charms or odd rituals, wearing a particular sock, never speaking to the cook on foggy mornings, or spitting 3 times whenever thunder rolls. Everyone becomes a reluctant meteorologist, squinting at the horizon and muttering dire predictions based on the way the crows are flying. But no matter how many times you pray for sunshine, curse the mud, or fantasize about a gentle breeze, the weather remains stubbornly indifferent. In the end, you accept it. Every day in the army is a new entry in the world's least appealing almanac. You don't fight the weather, you survive it. And if you're lucky, you'll live to complain about it. Which, in medieval terms, is practically a victory. The best way to boost morale is to find someone more miserable than you, which gets harder every hour. Rumors swirl about food, about pay, about the enemy. You start to envy the ones who caught dysentery and got sent home. The best way to boost morale is to find someone more miserable than you, which gets harder every hour. Rumors swirl about food, about pay, about the enemy. You start to envy the ones who caught dysentery and got sent home. In the medieval army, high morale is a fantasy usually reserved for songs, speeches, and the rare day someone finds a whole onion in their stew. For everyone else, it's a daily struggle against boredom, fear, homesickness, and the grim realization that you're sharing a tent with 6 grown men who snore like dying donkeys. Most days, morale is something that's talked about only when it's missing. The day starts with complaints. Someone's boots are wet. Someone else's bread is missing. And everyone is convinced the cook is trying to poison them slowly. You try to cheer up by remembering why you joined in the first place. Was it glory? Adventure? Free shoes? Whatever the reason, it fades quickly under the relentless grind of chores, mud, and the sergeant's relentless shouts. Optimism is in as short supply as soap. Rumors are the lifeblood of camp life. Every new whisper spreads faster than a cold. Some claim that reinforcements are coming, just as soon as they finish their breakfast and 3 weeks of unpaid labor. Others say the enemy is starving, or the king himself is about to ride in and save the day. You nod, you hope, but deep down, you know the only thing arriving soon is more rain. The most persistent rumor is about pay, that it's coming, that it's not coming, that it's already been spent by someone in a fancier hat. The only thing more regular than these rumors is the realization that your next coin might be your last. Entertainment is essential, but in short supply. Someone might start a song, but it usually devolves into a contest for who can invent the dirtiest lyrics. There's always the classic guess what animal that smell is game, or bets on how long before the next fight breaks out over bread, boots, or the last drop of ale. Occasionally, an old veteran will tell a story about a battle where everything went right, but even he can't remember if it was real or just a story to keep the new recruits from running away in the night. Homesickness is constant and contagious. Even the toughest men admit to missing home, usually after a few ales or a rough night sleeping in the mud. Letters are rare and precious. When one actually arrives, the entire tent gathers to listen, pretending not to care but secretly hanging on every word about warm fires, fresh bread, and clean water. For a few minutes, everyone remembers what they're fighting for: a return to normal misery, instead of this deluxe package. When morale sinks especially low, the officers get creative. There might be promises of extra rations, an extra hour's rest, or, on rare, blessed days, a bit of real meat. Sometimes there's a contest. Who can tell the best joke? Who can balance a sword on their nose? Or who can imitate the captain's terrible accent without getting caught? It works for a moment, until the next disaster strikes. Through it all, you keep moving, keep laughing, keep complaining, because that's how you survive. If you ever meet someone in camp who's actually cheerful, you assume they've either gone mad or just received a letter from home. In the end, morale in a medieval army isn't about feeling good. It's about not giving up, and as long as you're still here, grumbling with the rest, you count that as a win. When the order to charge finally comes, it's not heroic. It's a clumsy, screaming stampede. You're pushed forward whether you want to be or not, tripping over the fallen, the unlucky, and your own feet. When the order to charge finally comes, it's not heroic. It's a clumsy, screaming stampede. You're pushed forward whether you want to be or not, tripping over the fallen, the unlucky, and your own feet. All the training, marching, and misery have led to this. The moment when your sergeant's bellow becomes the starting gun for utter chaos. You always imagined battle would be organized, maybe even glorious, with knights in shining armor leading the way and everyone knowing exactly what to do. In reality, it's a mass panic. Everyone hoping to get it over with quickly and preferably in one piece. The build-up is tense. The officers gather, trying to look important, while the rest of you steal nervous glances at the enemy across the field. The sun is too bright. Your armor is too heavy. And the ground between you and the enemy is much too open for comfort. There's no stirring speech from the captain. He's either praying, hiding, or still working out which side is which. Instead, the command comes as a scream, "Charge!" What happens next is less brave advance and more collective anxiety attack. The line surges forward, propelled by the combined energy of terror, momentum, and peer pressure. You're packed in so tight, your only real choice is whether to run or be trampled. Feet slip on mud, shields bang together, and the only music is the cacophony of men yelling, armor rattling, and weapons clanging. In the chaos, all you can do is keep moving and hope nobody notices you're more likely to hit your own foot than the enemy. Time loses meaning in the middle of a charge. You could be running for 10 seconds or 10 minutes. There's no way to tell. The world narrows to the few feet ahead of you, filled with elbows, knees, and the occasional flash of a banner you're supposed to be following but can't see. Somewhere up ahead, you hear arrows hissing, men screaming, and the unmistakable sound of someone regretting their breakfast. The ground is its own enemy. Every step is a new hazard. Potholes, discarded shields, and the bodies of those who tripped or didn't duck fast enough. Someone loses a boot and keeps running. Someone else loses their nerve and is swept along anyway. It's a stampede of desperation, half run, half fall, and 100% adrenaline. You barely have time to think, let alone strategize. Your orders are simple. Don't stop, don't fall, and try not to be the first to reach the enemy, or the last. The men around you aren't thinking about honor or valor. They're thinking about surviving the next 5 seconds. Sword in hand, shield up, you charge ahead because there's nowhere else to go. When the two armies finally collide, it's nothing like the stories. There's no clean clash, no epic duel, just a messy tangle of limbs, mud, and noise. Weapons swing wildly, shields bash together, and every instinct is screaming to keep your head down and your feet moving. The only thing more dangerous than the enemy is the confusion itself. Somewhere in the chaos, you catch a glimpse of the sergeant, still yelling, still somehow in the thick of things. You realize with a strange comfort that nobody here really knows what's happening, least of all the men in charge. Everyone is just trying to survive the first terrible moments of battle. When the charge finally slows, you find yourself gasping for breath, heart pounding, covered in sweat, mud, and maybe someone else's lunch. The chaos isn't over, but you're still on your feet. And in a medieval battle, sometimes that's the only victory that matters. You hear a sound like rain, but sharper, arrows falling from the sky. There's no strategy except duck and pray. Someone next to you drops, and you're suddenly grateful for every inch you are below average in height. The first time you hear the infamous hiss of arrows overhead, it doesn't register as a threat. Maybe it's just the wind, you think, or the distant hum of bees, until the first man goes down beside you, clutching a new hole where his luck used to be. Suddenly, every childhood instinct kicks in. You hunch low, raise your shield, if you have one, and think fondly of all those times you considered yourself unlucky to be short. Archers on both sides have been waiting for this moment, standing at the rear and letting fly with a speed and enthusiasm that makes you wonder if they just really dislike everyone else. If you glance up, you might glimpse a black cloud of death arcing gracefully through the sky. It's almost beautiful if you ignore the fact that every glimmering point is headed somewhere dangerously close. Training doesn't prepare you for the feeling of being a human target. Your sergeant yells something about, "Keep moving," and shields up, but it's hard to obey orders when your main instinct is to dig a hole and hide in it until next week. You crouch as low as your armor allows, pressing in behind your neighbors and trying to become as unremarkable as possible. In a medieval army, the nail that sticks out is the first to be hammered, and arrows don't discriminate. There's a strange intimacy in shared danger. Nobody cares about rank, pay, or whose socks smell the worst. Everyone is equal under the rain of arrows, equally terrified, equally desperate, equally wet, thanks to the sudden urge to relieve yourself. Your world shrinks to the muddy patch beneath your knees, and the hope that the next volley finds someone, anyone, else. It's not just the arrows you worry about, it's where they land. The best-case scenario is they sink harmlessly into the ground, quivering like overcooked noodles. The worst case is a scream from someone up ahead, or the sickening thud of iron meeting flesh. Sometimes, an arrow glances off armor and ricochets into someone's face. Sometimes it gets stuck in a shield, and the owner spends the rest of the battle looking like a particularly unlucky hedgehog. The lucky ones have proper shields or helmets. The less fortunate make do with whatever they can find, a plank of wood, a pot lid, or sheer optimism. You cling to whatever you have, head tucked, listening to the world turn into chaos. The veteran next to you mutters prayers to every saint he can remember. The recruit on your other side tries to sing a song, his voice cracking with every fresh volley. Eventually, the arrows slow. Maybe the enemy is running low, or maybe they just want to see what's left standing. You risk a glance upward. The air seems to clear, the hissing fades, and life returns to something like normal. You check yourself for wounds, pat down your friends, and feel a strange surge of relief. A feeling that, against the odds, you're still here. But you know this isn't the last volley. In medieval war, arrows come and go like bad weather. All you can do is duck, hope, and remember that sometimes luck is the best armor you've got. And as you straighten up, blinking through sweat and fear, you start to understand why the poets never write songs about the guys in the second row. Close combat is less about skill and more about swinging wildly and trying not to scream louder than your neighbor. The stench of sweat and fear is overwhelming, and the ground is suddenly a lot slipperier. Close combat is less about skill and more about swinging wildly and trying not to scream louder than your neighbor. The stench of sweat and fear is overwhelming, and the ground is suddenly a lot slipperier. You always imagined a duel, one-on-one, the clash of blades, perhaps some witty banter before the decisive blow. In reality, the hand-to-hand fighting of a medieval battlefield is chaos at its most undignified. The moment the lines crash together, all organization vanishes. There is no room for elegance, only for survival. You can barely tell friend from foe, and there's a strong chance the next person who hits you is actually on your side. You grip your weapon so tight your knuckles ache. Someone's shield bashes into your ribs, a helmeted head slams your arm, and your sword feels suddenly heavier than it did in camp. Every swing is wild and desperate, more likely to hit mud or shield than actual flesh. You're shoulder to shoulder with 100 others, so packed in that you can feel the shudder of every impact down the line. The noise is incredible. Clanging metal, muffled grunts, howls of pain, shouts for help, all blend together into one overwhelming roar. The sergeant's voice is lost in the madness. If he's yelling orders, you can't hear them. You focus on not falling down, because in this mess, going to ground is a death sentence. The unlucky trip over a body, a rock, or their own feet, and vanish under the surge of boots and blades. Visibility is a sick joke. Sweat stings your eyes. Someone's blood spatters your face, yours or theirs, you can't be sure. The air is thick with dust, kicked up by dozens of stamping feet. Mud cakes your boots, then gets slicked by the mess of spilled life. For a moment, you lose your grip and nearly drop your sword. Panic flares. You fumble it back just in time as a spear glances off your shield with enough force to numb your arm. Strategy goes out the window. You're not aiming, you're reacting. If it moves, you try to hit it. If it hits you, you hit it back. Sometimes, you're just pushing and shoving, wrestling for space with strangers whose faces you'll never see. Occasionally, two fighters lock weapons and just shove at each other, each too exhausted to do anything but glare and drool. And then there's the terror. No matter how brave you thought you were, the first real taste of hand-to-hand combat shreds your nerves. You're breathing fast. Your heart hammers in your chest, and every second feels like a year. Someone is screaming, maybe it's you. For a moment, you can't hear anything but the rushing in your own ears. Every so often, a gap opens up. Someone ahead stumbles, and you lurch forward, gasping for air that smells of iron, sweat, and something much worse. There's no time for heroics. You swing, bash, push, and pray over and over, until your arms are lead and your legs threaten to give way. And just like that, it's over. Or at least, this part is. The line shifts, the surge moves on, and you find yourself still standing, miraculously whole, or at least mostly so. You check yourself for wounds, check your neighbors, and share a glance that says, "We made it, barely." Hand-to-hand fighting isn't about honor or skill. It's about panic, luck, and stubbornness. If you make it through, congratulations. You've survived one of history's worst group activities, and you've got the bruises to prove it. If your armor doesn't protect you from the enemy, it might just finish you off itself. Helmets slip, breastplates pinch, and a sudden trip can leave you flailing like a tipped turtle. Medieval armor looks heroic in paintings, but in real life, it's mostly a series of engineering challenges that test your patience, flexibility, and will to remain clothed in public. The first and most obvious problem is the weight. Steel plate is heavy. If you're wearing the full suit, it can weigh up to 60 pounds, more if you've made poor choices in the armory line. Chainmail is a bit lighter, but it still drags on your shoulders like a guilt trip from your mother. Heat is your first real foe. Under the summer sun, metal armor turns into a personal oven. The padding underneath, meant to prevent chafing and bruises, just soaks up your sweat and holds it against your skin like a warm, wet towel that never dries. Within minutes of marching or fighting, your body is working overtime to avoid bursting into flames. You start to fantasize about shade, a breeze, or just the sweet relief of taking it all off, until you remember that doing so mid-battle isn't really an option. Then there's mobility. Armor designers clearly believed that the most important thing in battle was to restrict every joint as much as possible. Knees and elbows bend, sort of, but crouching, sitting, or even raising your arms above your head is a complicated dance of grunts, awkward angles, and hope. If you drop something, you face the eternal question. Bend over and risk splitting your greaves, or leave your dignity and your lunch behind forever. Tripping is inevitable. In the chaos of battle, the ground is a mix of mud, bodies, discarded weapons, and whatever else history has left lying around. When your foot catches on something, and it will, you tumble forward, arms outstretched, hoping the padding breaks your fall. Rolling over is possible, but not graceful. Getting up is a group project. Sometimes you need a friend, a stick, or the intervention of fate itself. Meanwhile, the enemy is probably too busy laughing to take advantage. Then comes the accidental nudity. Armor is held together by straps, buckles, and a generous helping of optimism. A loose strap here, a broken buckle there, and suddenly you're displaying more than just your fighting spirit. A breastplate slips, revealing a patch of undershirt. A greave comes loose, and now your bare shin is the star of the show. Worst case, your belt gives way, and you're left with your tunic bunched around your waist while your comrades applaud or jeer. Forget about impressing the local villagers. You're just hoping nobody sketches the scene for posterity. Don't even get started on helmets. They pinch, they wobble, and they restrict your vision to a narrow slot, if you're lucky. Sweat pours into your eyes, and the constant clang of steel on steel echoes in your skull. Every step, swing, and stumble is accompanied by the reassuring rattle of a tin can rolling downhill. By the end of the day, you're bruised, overheated, and longing for a life that involves less metal and fewer public embarrassments. The armor may save your life, but it also ensures you'll never forget the experience, mostly because you'll be picking padding out of strange places for weeks. In medieval war, your greatest struggle isn't always the enemy, it's just keeping your armor and your dignity intact. Survive that, and you might just make it to tomorrow's disaster. If you're hurt, congratulations. The options are infection, amputation, or being left where you fall. There are no painkillers, only a hearty cup of this will hurt, and a new nickname, usually Lefty. If you're hurt, congratulations. The options are infection, amputation, or being left where you fall. There are no painkillers, only a hearty cup of this will hurt, and a new nickname, usually Lefty. Injuries are inevitable in a medieval battle, and you quickly learn that the real danger isn't always from swords or arrows. It's from everything else that comes after. The moment you feel the sharp sting of a cut or the deep thud of a bruise, you're playing the original lottery. Will this be the end, or just the start of another round of medieval medicine? First comes the pain. There's no such thing as a gentle injury. If you're lucky, it's a shallow slice that bleeds a lot but misses anything important. If you're not, it's a puncture, a crushed bone, or something sticking out that absolutely shouldn't be. You grit your teeth and hope nobody notices, because showing weakness is just asking for the sergeant to reassign you to even worse duty. After all, nothing says team player like dragging yourself across the field with an arrow sticking out of your leg. The trip to the surgeon's tent is a walk of shame, assuming you can walk at all. You'll find the barber surgeon surrounded by the wounded, a man with blood on his apron and a look that says, "I've seen it all," and none of it ends well. He takes a quick look, grunts, and starts rooting through his tools, usually a saw, a big knife, some rags, and a cup of something that passes for antiseptic if you squint and have no sense of smell. If your wound is bleeding, the answer is pressure and hope. If it's deep, out comes the needle and thread, the same kind used on tents. No anesthesia here, just a quick drink of something strong and the command to hold still. If bone is involved, expect splints, rough bandages, and a lot of swearing. If you're really unlucky and infection sets in, you've got two choices. Wait for nature to take its course, or have something chopped off. Either way, you're about to learn more about pain than you ever wanted to know. Infection is almost guaranteed. Wounds fester, fevers spike, and soon your friends are placing bets on which day you'll get your first leech. If the limb goes black, amputation is next. The operation is quick, too quick really, and you're given a stick to bite and maybe a rag to hold. There's no ceremony, no guarantee, and definitely no clean tools. If you survive, you'll get a nickname and possibly a small cheer. If not, there's always a shallow grave and a brief mention at dinner. The really unlucky don't even make it that far. Some are left where they fall, either because there's no hope or because no one has the energy to drag them back. The battlefield is dotted with men groaning, cursing, and bargaining with any saint they can remember. Those who recover become legends, walking, limping, or hobbling reminders of what it takes to survive. Scars become badges of honor, missing fingers are conversation starters. You swap stories about the worst wounds, the wildest recoveries, and the miracle that is still being alive. The only certainty is that injury is never far away, and everyone takes a turn sooner or later. In the medieval army, injuries are random, brutal, and democratic. There are no guarantees, just luck, stubbornness, and the hope that, this time, you'll be one of the survivors. Surviving battle is only half the challenge. Now you have to survive the night, the howling of wolves, drunken arguments, and the realization that you're using your sword as a pillow. Sweet dreams. Nightfall in a medieval army camp is less peaceful evening and more test of endurance. You might imagine that after a day of marching, fighting, and barely avoiding death by arrow or bad stew, you'd collapse and sleep like the dead. But in reality, the night brings its own special blend of discomfort and chaos. Rest, like hot food and basic dignity, is strictly optional. You start by picking your bed, if you're lucky, a dry spot in a tent. If you're not, a patch of lumpy ground surrounded by boots and someone's dirty laundry. Luxury is a blanket that only smells slightly of old goat and the hope that it won't rain before morning. For a pillow, you use whatever's handy. Your rolled-up cloak, a half-empty pack, or your own arm. Some men are resourceful enough to use their shields. The truly desperate settle for their sword, its cold, lumpy surface a nightly reminder of how far you've fallen from civilization. Noise is guaranteed. Soldiers swap stories, sing badly, and argue over everything from who snores the loudest to which part of the sky looks most like home. Somewhere, a group is playing dice, loudly accusing each other of cheating and plotting revenge with tomorrow's breakfast rations. There's always a cluster of men who, having found an extra cup of ale, decide that midnight is the perfect time for wrestling. They crash into tents, knock over water barrels, and generally remind everyone that peace is a foreign concept. If you manage to doze off, it won't last. Someone tripping, a dog barking, or the sudden chorus of howling wolves from the distant woods will jerk you awake. If it's not animals, it's the sergeant, prowling the camp to make sure no one has deserted or died quietly in the corner. He has a sixth sense for detecting sleep and interrupts it with a boot or a barked order to roll over. You're snoring like a dying cow. The elements have no mercy. If it's cold, you shiver under your blanket and pray for sunrise. If it's hot, you lie awake sweating, listening to mosquitoes hum, and your neighbors complain about the air being too thick to breathe. Rain is a recurring nightmare. Tents leak, puddles spread, and suddenly you're drifting off in a minor flood, hoping to wake up at least on the same side of the river. Then there are the bugs, fleas, lice, and a whole cast of other creepy crawlies consider soldiers a midnight snack. The camp is alive with scratching, slapping, and occasional muttered curses. By morning, you feel less like a human and more like an all-you-can-eat buffet for things with too many legs. And yet, somehow, you get used to it. The shared misery becomes a kind of grim comfort. You swap horror stories, share stale bread, and find yourself laughing at the absurdity of it all. You dream, when you manage to sleep, of soft beds, warm fires, and mornings that don't start with a shout or a punch. As dawn creeps in and the camp comes back to noisy, uncomfortable life, you realize you've survived another night. Not well rested, not clean, not particularly happy, but alive. And in the medieval army, that's just about as good as it gets. Dinner is a stew of questionable meat, old beans, and whatever someone found on the road. If the enemy doesn't get you, botulism might. You lie down and hope for the best. Mealtime in a medieval army camp is a gamble, a culinary lottery with the stakes set somewhere between mild discomfort and 3 days of dramatic regret. There is no menu, no nutritionist, and absolutely no guarantees. Dinner is whatever can be boiled, stewed, or hacked into bite-sized chunks before the cook gets tired of swatting flies. If you're lucky, it's something that once walked on 4 legs. If you're not, it's something that moved more recently. You queue up with your battered bowl, eyeing the cauldron and the man ladling out the evening's main event. The stew is thick, brown, and so mysterious you start to wonder if the cook lost the recipe or ever had one. It smells like meat, onions, and the underlying terror of 100 other dinners gone wrong. If you ask what's in it, the cook just grins and says, "Eat while it's hot, or at least while it's moving." The first bite is always a leap of faith. You chew slowly, hunting for bones, gristle, or anything suspiciously crunchy. It's hard to tell what's tougher, the meat or your digestive system. If it's stringy and bland, you count yourself lucky, because the alternative is a flavor profile that can only be described as something has gone horribly wrong. Occasionally you hit a jackpot and bite into a suspiciously tender bit. You don't ask questions. Questions lead to knowledge, and knowledge leads to despair. Beans are a staple, and not in a good way. They're often undercooked, overcooked, or so old they should come with a warning label. They bring their own consequences, which the men call marching thunder, the musical accompaniment to every night in camp. Some soldiers claim it keeps the wolves away. Others think it just keeps everyone else at a safe distance. Spoilage is a fact of life. There's no refrigeration, so food is salted, smoked, or left to fend for itself in the open air. Sometimes, a little green fuzz is ignored. Mold is extra flavor, according to the cook. Meat is shared with flies, rats, and anything else bold enough to sneak into camp. You've heard stories about men brought low not by the enemy's sword, but by yesterday's rabbit stew. These tales aren't just cautionary, they're a survival guide. If it smells too strong, looks too pink, or moves on its own, you might be better off skipping dinner altogether. Water doesn't help. Ale is safer, but it only masks the taste and dulls the senses. The camp rumor mill churns out new horror stories every week. The one about the chicken that glowed in the dark, or the cheese that screamed when cut. Nobody believes these stories until the stew bubbles a little too energetically. After dinner, you stretch out, stomach rumbling with uncertainty. The bravest sleep close to the latrine just in case. The veterans always keep a clear path to the nearest bush, having learned the hard way that some risks are best managed proactively. Yet, somehow, everyone eats. Hunger always wins, and the alternative is worse. If you survive another night, you count yourself lucky, not just to be alive, but to have made it through another medieval meal without adding your own tale of digestive disaster to the camp legend. So you close your eyes, hope for the best, and promise yourself you'll never complain about leftovers again, at least not until breakfast. After dinner, you settle in for an itchy, restless sleep as a host of insects make your body their personal battlefield. At least you're never alone. Forget the enemy outside the camp, the real siege is happening under your tunic. Lice, fleas, and a rotating cast of microscopic tormentors are your constant companions in the medieval army. No matter how clean you think you are, or how often you try to shake out your clothes, these little stowaways have staked a permanent claim. Even the noblest knight isn't immune. Insects are the true great equalizer. Everyone itches, everyone scratches, and everyone blames everyone else. The trouble starts with lice. These tiny vampires are everywhere. On your scalp, in your beard, even hiding in the seams of your only shirt. They multiply overnight, thriving in the cozy warmth of your unwashed hair. The first sign is the itch, spreading from your neck to your temples, and soon you're locked in a daily duel with invisible enemies. You become an expert at scratching without looking too desperate, but subtlety fades quickly. By bedtime, the tent is filled with the gentle chorus of men scratching in unison, a sound more reliable than the camp rooster. Fleas are next. They're smaller, meaner, and far jumpier. You feel the tiny bites on your ankles and legs, like sharp little pinpricks that never stop. The camp dogs are the main suppliers. But at this point, fleas seem to arrive from thin air. You compare bite patterns with your neighbors like it's a contest. Who has the worst rash? Who's found the biggest flea? who's managed to squash one before it got away. It's communal suffering, and the only cure is mutual commiseration. If you think you're safe at night, think again. The bedroll is a buffet for every bloodsucker in the county. You spend half the night itching, the other half hunting tiny black specks that scatter at the first sign of light. Sometimes you think you've won, only to wake up scratching a new spot. The lucky few rotate sleeping positions, trying to throw the insects off the scent. The unlucky ones just give up and accept their fate. There are folk remedies, of course. Some swear by herbal salves, others by smoke from the campfire, and a few even try shaving off all their hair, only to discover that lice simply migrate to new, more inventive locations. Soap is rare, water even rarer, and cleanliness mostly a fantasy. The best you can do is shake out your shirt, hope for a cold snap, bugs hate frost, and make peace with your new identity as an ambulatory buffet. The officers aren't spared either. You hear them grumbling as they scratch under their gleaming armor. Even the sergeant, who pretends to be above such indignities, is caught sneaking a scratch behind his ear when he thinks nobody is watching. There's a silent, shared agreement not to mention it out loud. Insects are the only thing the entire army can agree on. They're here to stay, and no one escapes. By morning, you're sleep-deprived, cranky, and ready to trade all your worldly possessions for a single clean shirt. But at least you know one thing for certain. No matter how lonely, bored, or miserable you feel, you're never truly alone. Not with an army of tiny nightmares to keep you company. In the medieval army, it's not just survival of the fittest, it's survival of the itchiest. And that, more than any battle, is the real test of endurance. You consider running away, but there are guards, dogs, and the possibility of being hanged for cowardice. Plus, you're not sure you could even walk to the next village without collapsing. After days of mud, battle, and questionable stew, the idea of simply slipping away in the night starts to look more and more attractive. The camp is a waking nightmare, cold, crowded, and crawling with lice. You dream of home, of clean sheets, and a life where the loudest thing at night is a snoring spouse, not the man next to you choking on his own beard. Desertion, just leaving it all behind, seems like the most sensible thing anyone could do. Except, of course, it isn't. First, there are the practicalities. The army isn't exactly subtle about keeping its soldiers in line. Guards patrol the perimeter, eyes peeled for anyone lurking in the shadows. Dogs, lean, mean, and far too enthusiastic, sniff around camp, eager for a chase. There are traps set in the undergrowth, pits cleverly disguised as rabbit holes. The message is clear. You're not just fighting the enemy, you're fighting your own side's security system. Then, there's the problem of what comes after. Let's say, by some miracle, you actually manage to sneak past the guards and escape into the darkness. Now what? You're in the middle of nowhere, lost in unfamiliar woods or fields. The locals don't trust wandering strangers, especially ones with bad haircuts, worse hygiene, and an accent that says just fled the nearest battle. You'd have to find food, avoid patrols, and hope you don't stumble into a swamp or an enemy outpost by mistake. Even if you make it to the next village, things don't get any easier. The laws are harsh. Desertion is a hanging offense, and the army loves a public example. If you're caught, you can expect a very short trial and a very long drop. Word travels fast. Innkeepers, merchants, even children are on the lookout for unfamiliar faces. One wrong move, one unlucky conversation, and you'll find yourself back in camp under much less pleasant circumstances. And what about your conscience? For all its miseries, army life is a brotherhood of sorts. You eat, march, and fight with the same men, sharing what little comfort and humor you can scrounge. Abandoning them, especially on the eve of a big battle, carries a sting. Even if you could live with the shame, The stories about what happens to deserters are enough to keep most men rooted to their muddy spot. Some try to fake illness or injury, hoping to get sent home. But the army doctors are used to theatrics. Miraculous recoveries are met with chores twice as unpleasant as battle. Others talk big about leaving. But when darkness falls and the watchfires burn, they curl up and stay put, comforted more by the presence of familiar misery than by the risks of escape. Of course, there are a few legends, the ones who really did slip away and made it home. They're whispered about in awe, but nobody ever meets them. More often, you hear about the ones who were caught, heads on spikes, names struck from the rolls, the ultimate warning to the rest. So you stay, even when every muscle aches to leave. Because as bad as things are, the world outside might just be worse. In the medieval army, freedom is always just out of reach, a story you tell yourself on long, sleepless nights, before rising again to face another day in mud, misery, and camaraderie. If, against all odds, you make it through 24 hours, you look around and realize you're dirty, hungry, and more exhausted than you've ever been. You're not dead, but you're definitely not alive in any way you recognize. Welcome to medieval soldiering. Try again tomorrow. The concept of survival takes on a whole new meaning after a full day in the medieval army. Morning started with a muddy boot in your ribs and only went downhill from there. You ate questionable porridge, suited up in armor that tried to suffocate you, dodged arrows and angry sergeants. And now, as the sun dips behind the trees, you're still standing, though standing might be a generous word for the limp, footsore shuffle you now call walking. Everything hurts. Your muscles ache from marching, your shoulders are bruised from armor, and your stomach makes noises that scare even the bravest rats. The air around you is thick with the stench of sweat, mud, old beans, and the lingering hope that tomorrow's breakfast won't fight back. You're so filthy that, if you ever make it home, your own mother might mistake you for a minor local monster. Your mind is barely hanging on. The day's chaos plays back in blurry flashes, charging into battle, arrows raining down, the blur of swords, and the ever-present panic that this might be your last sunrise. You think about the friends you started with, the ones who are still here, and the ones who aren't. The camp feels emptier than it did this morning. You try not to look at the fresh spots in the graveyard, just beyond the tents. If you've picked up any new injuries, and let's face it, you have, you're just grateful they're not the kind that leak too much or require immediate amputation. A scratch here, a bruise there, maybe a missing tooth or a new collection of bites from the local insect population. You don't even bother complaining anymore. Nobody listens. And everyone else has their own list of complaints. As night falls, you count yourself lucky, even as you're lying in the mud using a rock as a pillow. The stories you once heard about glory and honor sound ridiculous now. Survival, plain and simple, is all that matters. In this world, making it to sunset is an accomplishment, and you silently congratulate yourself for it, even if nobody else does. There's a strange camaraderie among those who are left. You share a look with the men nearby, equal parts disbelief and grim amusement. You laugh about the worst parts of the day because laughing is all you have left. Jokes are dark, humor is dry, and optimism is as rare as fresh socks. But the very act of complaining together is its own small victory. It means you're still here. You outlasted another day. For a moment, you wonder what life would be like if you'd never picked up a sword. Then remember you probably would have ended up hungry, cold, and itchy anyway. Medieval life doesn't offer many comfort zones. As the camp settles into another restless, noisy night, you close your eyes and hope that tomorrow will be kinder. But you don't count on it. In the medieval army, tomorrow is a promise made by fools and sergeants, both equally untrustworthy. If you wake up again, sore but breathing, congratulations. You've survived another round, If you don't, well, at least you won't have to eat the stew again. That's about as close to hope as it gets. Welcome to a day in the life of a medieval soldier. Not quite alive, never quite dead, and always one step away from disaster. At some point, nature calls louder than your commanding officer. The only bathroom is a shallow trench dug by someone with zero interest in sanitation. You squat behind a bush, praying no arrows are headed your way and trying not to think about the last guy who went here and never came back. On the medieval battlefield, bathroom breaks are not a matter of comfort, but of urgent necessity. When you're armored from head to toe, the first real challenge is simply removing enough gear to answer nature's call before the fighting resumes. If you're lucky, you can undo a few straps and wriggle out of your chainmail without looking like a fish flopping in the mud. If you're unlucky, you're left with the immortal question: is it worth dying with dignity or with clean underwear? The facilities, or rather, the lack thereof, are legendary for all the wrong reasons. The army's solution to sanitation is a series of pits or ditches, dug hastily and barely disguised. Most are already overfilled, and none are marked clearly enough to avoid the occasional tragic misstep. You hope the wind is blowing the right direction, because the scent drifts over camp like an unwanted guest. Privacy is a forgotten luxury. If you're modest, forget it. The only screens are bushes, battered shields, or other men in equally desperate need. It's a delicate dance of pretending not to see, hear, or judge your comrades, even as everyone is thinking exactly the same thing, namely, how quickly can I finish and get out of here alive? Some try to time their visits for moments of chaos, hoping the noise of battle will mask any embarrassing noises. Others just accept that dignity is for people with proper plumbing. The real challenge, though, is not being caught out in the open when the next wave of arrows or cavalry charges. You develop a sixth sense for incoming danger, a prickle on the back of your neck, or the sudden silence that means everyone else has run for cover. More than one unlucky soul has been caught with their pants down, and the stories are retold for weeks, usually by people who didn't survive much longer themselves. Toilet paper, as you know it, does not exist. If you're lucky, you find a handful of moss, a cleanish rag, or maybe some leaves that don't sting or cause an unexpected rash. Improvisation is the mother of sanitation. Wiping with a handful of grass is considered a good day. A smooth rock is luxury. If all else fails, you just hope the next rainstorm will solve your problems for you. After you finish your business, there's no tap to wash your hands. Water is too precious to waste on hygiene, so you wipe your hands on the grass, your tunic, or just hope the next thing you touch isn't food. Everyone smells, and no one cares. You're equally likely to get sick from the bathroom as from the battlefield. But the biggest threat is still embarrassment. Despite all of this, bathroom breaks become a source of grim humor. You swap stories about the worst ditches, the close calls, the embarrassing noises. Survival is about more than just avoiding swords. It's about getting through the most basic parts of life without disaster. So next time you complain about a public restroom, remember, on the medieval battlefield, the only thing worse than fighting for your life is fighting for your right to go in peace. You notice your fellow soldiers clutching little tokens, rabbit feet, saint medallions, or a suspiciously greasy feather. Some mutter prayers before battle, others swear by lucky socks they haven't washed since last Christmas. The only real magic is if any of you make it out alive. But you figure a quick prayer can't hurt much. In the world of the medieval army, where odds of survival are somewhere between unlikely and miraculous, superstition is as necessary as a sword. Before every battle, the camp is alive with rituals, whispered charms, and nervous bargains made with saints, spirits, and anything else that might be listening. No one admits to believing in luck, at least not out loud, but you can see it in the way men finger their talismans and avoid walking under the officer's tent rope. which everyone knows is bad luck. Charms are everywhere. Some wear little pouches of herbs around their necks, stuffed with garlic, rosemary, or whatever the local wise woman swore would ward off evil. Others have small bones tied to their belts, borrowed from churchyards or scavenged from last night's stew. The more devout carry saint medallions, kissing them before battle or pressing them to their hearts with a desperate hope. One man insists his rat skull keeps him safe. Nobody argues, because he's survived 3 battles and a latrine collapse. Then there are the prayers. Soldiers pray to every saint imaginable: Street George for courage, Street Christopher for safe travel, Street Barbara for protection from sudden death, which, in this line of work, is pretty much the job description. Some men get creative, mumbling bargains with lesser-known martyrs or the local river spirit, promising to light a candle or donate a chicken if they make it through the day. Of course, personal rituals multiply. Socks are worn inside out, shirts are never washed on a Thursday, and everyone knows not to sharpen their sword before breakfast. There's a man who refuses to eat beans on the eve of battle, claiming they bring bad luck and, worse, bad wind. Some soldiers mark their shields with strange symbols, a mix of church Latin, local dialect, and whatever looked impressive when they saw it carved into a tree. No one is above clutching at hope, however strange. The fear of curses is just as strong. Soldiers avoid the unlucky part of camp, the tent where the last man to die slept, the patch of ground that never seems to dry. You'll hear whispers about omens, a raven seen at dawn, a dog howling at midnight, a dropped coin that lands the wrong way up. These are discussed with the seriousness usually reserved for battle plans, because if fate is fickle, it helps to hedge your bets. Mockery is common, at least on the surface. Men joke about each other's charms, swap wild stories about a cousin's uncle who dodged every arrow thanks to his grandmother's lucky turnip. But everyone has a line they won't cross, a habit they won't break. Just in case the universe really is keeping score, you find yourself making your own deals as battle approaches. Maybe you tuck a pebble into your boot, or mutter a quick promise to build a shrine if you survive. It's not that you believe in magic exactly. It's just that, in a world this dangerous, it doesn't hurt to have a little extra on your side. So you join the silent prayers, grip your charm, and take your place in the line, hoping luck is real, and tonight it's feeling generous. You'd like to send a note home, but you can't write, and neither can anyone else in your squad. So you find Jeff, the camp scribe, whose spelling is creative and whose sympathy is limited. He'll scribble whatever you want, as long as you pay him in ale or rumors about the commander's weird hat. In the medieval army, literacy is a rare and powerful tool, one most soldiers don't possess. Your parents never taught you your letters. They were too busy teaching you how to milk goats and dodge tax collectors. The only books you've ever seen were chained to the church lectern, guarded by a priest who looked like he might bite. So when it comes to sending word home, you join the queue at Jeff's makeshift desk, a splintery board balanced between 2 barrels and covered with ink blots, breadcrumbs, and at least 3 dead flies. Jeff is a legend in his own right. Nobody knows where he came from or why he stuck around. Some say he's a failed monk. Others think he just enjoys spelling people's names in new and exciting ways. He keeps a quill tucked behind one ear, has ink stains up to his elbows, and wears spectacles so thick he could use them as shields. His main qualification is that he can make marks on parchment that, with some squinting, pass for words. The process is as follows. You hand Jeff your precious scrap of parchment, or failing that, an old bit of cloth or bark, mutter your message, and hope he translates your thoughts accurately. Jeff listens, frowns, then repeats your message back, usually with some editorial improvements. You wanted to say, "I'm alive, send socks." Jeff writes, "Your loving son, enduring the glories of war, requests fine woolens and blessings. Subtle, but effective, privacy is non-existent. As you dictate, a crowd gathers, curious friends, bored sergeants, and the odd chicken. Every message becomes public property, retold with embellishments until your poor mother is sure you're either a hero or about to marry the local barmaid. Jeff is unbothered. He takes notes for anyone who pays, never passes judgment, and occasionally spices things up with a dramatic flourish or a bit of Latin he remembers from somewhere. Payment is flexible. Jeff accepts coins, but he also takes dried meat, ale, or news about camp scandals. He's the only man who knows every secret, every romance, every petty theft. If you want your letter sent quickly, you might have to sweeten the deal, maybe a good story, maybe an IOU for your next turn on latrine duty. Sometimes, messages actually make it home, carried by a passing merchant, a wandering friar, or the rare official courier. Your words cross miles of mud, war, and hungry wolves. Weeks later, you might get a reply, usually a few lines from your mother, asking why you haven't written more often, or a scrawled note from your brother, wondering if you ever paid him back for that lost chicken. For some, these letters are lifelines, a thread connecting you to a world beyond mud and misery. For others, it's a final farewell, one last chance to say the things you never managed when you were home. Jeff, ever pragmatic, treats every letter the same, as another small story added to the great chaotic tapestry of camp life. You finish your dictation, watch Jeff dry the ink with a pinch of sand, and accept your copy, misspelled, smudged, but yours. You slip it into your pack, feeling oddly hopeful. In a world where tomorrow is never guaranteed, even a poorly written letter is proof you're still fighting, still thinking of home, and still, somehow, holding on. You're not always marching or fighting. Sometimes you're just waiting. For days or weeks, trapped outside castle walls, you eat stale bread, watch for falling chamber pots, and bet on how many rats you'll catch by sundown. If you're really lucky, someone starts a song. If you're not, it's another round of Count the Boils. A siege sounds exciting in stories. In reality, it's a test of patience, endurance, and your ability to cope with crushing boredom. Once the army settles in and the camp is built, the real enemy isn't the defenders behind the wall, it's time itself. Your job, for days on end, is to sit, stand, or pace while staring at a castle that stubbornly refuses to surrender or fall down on its own. Some men joke that the walls are held up by pure stubbornness and the ghosts of failed attacks. Every day follows the same routine. You wake up to a chorus of groans and the ever-present scratching of lice. Breakfast is the same as lunch, and lunch is the same as yesterday. Hard bread, dubious stew, and whatever you manage to borrow from the baggage train. If you're lucky, you get a turn at the campfire. If not, you gnaw your bread until it's soft enough to swallow, or you lose a tooth trying. The waiting is punctuated by the occasional shout or alarm. Someone spots movement on the battlements, or an archer sends a warning shot your way. Mostly, though, you spend your days dodging insults, rocks, or, if your luck is truly bad, the contents of the defender's chamber pots. Nothing builds character like narrowly avoiding a rain of sewage from 40 feet up. To pass the time, you invent games. Some soldiers bet on how long until the next assault. Others start a rat-catching competition, proudly displaying their trophies and daring the cook to add them to the next stew. You whittle sticks, trade tall tales, and when things get desperate, compare boils. There's always someone who claims theirs is shaped like a famous saint. Rats, of course, are everywhere. They swarm the camp by the hundreds, bold as brass and twice as fast. At night, you feel them scampering over your feet, nibbling on whatever crumbs you failed to guard. More than one soldier wakes to find a rat tugging at his blanket or chewing on his bootlaces. Some brave souls adopt a camp cat, But most felines quickly realize there are easier ways to make a living. Personal hygiene, never a strong point in army life, declines rapidly. You wash with rainwater when you can, but mostly you accept that you'll smell like a damp blanket for the foreseeable future. The sick gather in a corner of camp, groaning and muttering, while the healthy try not to think about how easily the sick list can grow. The boredom is occasionally broken by a skirmish, a half-hearted assault on the wall, a sally by the defenders, or an argument between the officers that devolves into shouting and finger-pointing. Sometimes, someone tries to tunnel under the wall or build a ram. Usually, this ends in disappointment and a lot of mud. Mostly, you wait and wait. Days blur into weeks, and the castle seems as indestructible as ever. You start to wonder if the siege will end before you do. At night, you stare at the stars, dreaming of a bed, a bath, and a meal that doesn't squeak. Siege life is misery, patience, and an ongoing lesson in humility, taught by a wall that simply won't budge. If, by some twisted miracle, you make it longer than most, you're rewarded not with glory but with more responsibility, like carrying heavy equipment or shouting at the new recruits to walk it off when they lose a toenail. Welcome to the middle management of misery, where your new title is target. The medieval army's idea of a reward is as warped as its sense of comfort. There's no ceremony, no shiny badge, just a curt nod from the sergeant or, if you're unlucky, a clap on the back that nearly knocks you into the nearest fire pit. One morning, you're just another mud-stained face in the crowd. The next, you're told to watch over the new lads because you seem less likely to die today. High praise indeed. Your new duties are legion. First, you inherit all the worst jobs: organizing gear, fetching water, and making sure nobody accidentally sets the camp on fire. Again, you're in charge of waking everyone before dawn, which instantly makes you the most unpopular person in camp. Second, only to the cook on bean night. The sergeant hands you a stick and tells you to keep them in line, which mostly means shouting louder and trying to remember the names of men who all look equally lost. You spend your days refereeing squabbles, patching up bruised egos and bodies, and delivering lectures you barely believe yourself. Discipline is now your responsibility, which means stopping the brawls before they reach the officer's tent and inventing punishments that don't end in permanent injury. Your reward for handling one crisis is 2 more disasters and an accusation that you're getting soft. There's paperwork too. You never thought you'd see so many lists in your life: roll calls, ration counts, lost equipment forms, usually lost by you somehow. The scribe, Jeff, is no help, as he seems to spell every name differently each day and occasionally invents new recruits just to keep things interesting. You soon realize why the last man in this job started talking to his boots and wandering off in the rain. Supervision means no more hiding at the back during drill or sneaking an extra nap behind the baggage cart. Now you're expected to set an example. That means keeping your uniform marginally cleaner, your boots somewhat laced, and your beard trimmed at least once a month. Any sign of weakness is noticed and pounced on by the men who were your equals only yesterday. And yet, the dangers multiply. Officers expect you to lead the charge, break up fights, and be the first to volunteer for special duties. Special, of course, means unpleasant or potentially fatal. When things go wrong, and they always do, you're the first one they blame and the last one they thank. Leadership, you realize, is another word for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there are small compensations. The other veterans nod at you in the morning, and the green recruits sometimes look at you as if you might know what you're doing. You earn a bigger portion of stew, barely, and the right to mutter bitter wisdom under your breath. Back in my day, you start to say, until you remember your day was just last week. So if you find yourself promoted, don't celebrate too soon. In the medieval army, advancement means more headaches, more chores, and a higher chance of being noticed when arrows start flying. But hey, you're still alive, and that, as you well know, is the rarest title of all. As night falls and you drift away from the mud, blood, and barely edible turnips of medieval soldiering, take a slow breath and let the chaos fade into the background. You've survived your first, and probably last, 24 hours on the battlefield, dodging arrows, battling armor, negotiating with your own digestive system, and discovering new ways to regret all your life choices. Tonight, as you nestle into your impossibly soft mattress, surrounded by clean sheets and blissful silence, spare a thought for the soldiers of the past. For all their bravado, most weren't heroes or villains. They were tired, hungry, slightly confused people just trying to make it through one more day without being run over by a horse, hit by flying soup, or bitten by something living in their boots. Their struggles were real, their complaints eternal, and their chances of survival, well, you've seen the odds. But beneath all the grime and gallows humor, there's something worth honoring. These were people who endured every flavor of misery and still managed to joke about it. They fought for king, coin, or just the hope of seeing home again, carrying on in the face of discomfort that would send most of us scrambling for HR. Their resilience, sometimes stubborn, sometimes desperate, always a little absurd, is stitched into the story of survival that brought us here. So tonight, as you tuck into your clean bed with hot water, Wi-Fi, and indoor plumbing, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors who survived lice, leeches, and armor that doubled as a sauna. Because history may be brutal and bizarre, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and, at their core, a little bit ridiculous. Sleep well, knowing you live in a world where breakfast doesn't fight back.